to Weekly World News on Spring Nectar TV, brought to you by Vibha Ramesh, Los Angeles, United States. First, the top headlines. Biden announced sanctions on Russia. Arbery's murderers found guilty. Putin confirms recognition of 2 Ukrainian states, gets closer to a full invasion. India and UAE share views on terrorism. Young Indian grandmaster at 16. Queen Elizabeth self-isolates, receives weekly update from Prime Minister. Facebook launches new content format. Moving on to news in detail. Following Russia's latest move on Ukraine, US President Joe Biden announced new sanctions. To that end, the US joined hands with Europe in levying economic penalties on Russia. As a first step, the sanctions would target the Russian sovereign debt and Russian elites. The move was made in response to Russia deploying its troops into 2 separatist regions of Ukraine. Biden called this action the beginning of a Russian invasion of Ukraine. Meanwhile, the 3 white men who chased Ahmaud Arbery and unjustifiably pulled the trigger on him were tried for murder by the federal court. As news would have it, the prosecutor argued that the fatal act was a result of pent-up racial anger. And on Tuesday, the 3 convicts responsible for the death of the innocent man were found guilty of hate crimes. The jury, that had a mix of 8 white persons, 3 black and 1 Hispanic, deliberated for several hours over the case and eventually concluded with the decision that the 3 men are indeed guilty. While the McMichael father and son duo were guilty of using firearms and kidnapping, their neighbor Brian was found guilty of kidnapping. And on the Jan 6 Capitol attack, the court announced on Tuesday that Trump's request to the lower court to prevent the investigating team from accessing the White House records was officially rejected. Moving on, Russian President Vladimir Putin announced the recognition of Donetsk and Lugansk as the nation expanded its borders to the 2 Russian-controlled territories. In his words, he said, "We have recognized the independence of these republics, which means we have recognized all their fundamental documents, including the Constitution. And the Constitution prescribes the borders within the Donetsk and Lugansk regions at the time when they were part of Ukraine." News has it that by recognizing the territories and expanding its borders, it is evident that the country is building the foundation for a bigger and larger conflict. Putin further confirmed that Russia will back the territorial claims of the 2 East Ukrainian states. Subsequently, the US Secretary of State remarked that the purpose of the Thursday meeting scheduled with his counterpart has now become void, as he said, "Now that we see the invasion is beginning and Russia has made clear its wholesale rejection of diplomacy, it does not make sense to go forward with that meeting at this time." Meanwhile, in India, 14 years after the deadly attack in Ahmedabad, the bombers finally received the death sentence. To that end, the court passed its verdict on 49 people who were involved in the serial bombing of 2008. While 38 of them received death sentences, 11 were sentenced to life imprisonment. According to sources, 20 bombs were planted across shops, parks, and hospitals in the city of Ahmedabad, thereby killing 56 people. This was a rare occurrence where a record number of people received sentences in a single case. In a virtual summit attended by Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, the 2 leaders agreed to stand together in the fight against terrorism. Further, they also signed a comprehensive economic partnership agreement that will aid in bilateral trade in services and goods between the 2 countries. And on Sunday, a young 16-year-old lad became the 5th youngest grandmaster. To that end, Ramesh Babu Pragnananda defeated his idol Magnus Carlsen in 39 moves. The child prodigy is the youngest to defeat world champion Carlsen. Over to Canada. On Friday morning, police started arresting the protesters demonstrating against the vaccine pass mandate. The move was triggered as the protests had brought the country's capital to a standstill for weeks. To that end, police shouted warnings from loudspeakers. "You must leave, you will be arrested." While several protesters were angered by this extreme move, local residents were relieved that the incessant honking and slogan chanting finally came to an end, as one resident said, "I live down here and I haven't been able to get to do anything, including my pharmacy, for 3 weeks." As another yelled, "And now you're going to go home, thankfully, because you lost." And Sunday saw a new beginning as downtown Ottawa was secured with fencing as workers set out to clear the streets and pick up the trash from 3 weeks left behind by the protesters. In the words of Interim Police Chief Steve Bell, "We're not done with this operation yet. Over the next several days, police will determine how we maintain a presence and make sure that nobody returns to occupy our streets again." Moving on to the United Kingdom, a day after the Queen tested positive for COVID-19, she self-isolated herself. With cold-like symptoms, she will continue to be in isolation in her Windsor home until tested negative. However, that did not stop her from executing some of the simpler royal duties in her capacity. She had also made arrangements to receive weekly updates from the Prime Minister on Wednesdays. That said, England will lift all COVID-related restrictions on April 1st, including the removal of free mass testing sites. The move was made after the Cabinet ruled in favour of Chancellor of the Exchequer Rishi Sunak's proposal to cut pandemic-related costs. To that effect, Prime Minister Boris Johnson announced the end of free testing sites from April 1st. He also added that individuals that test positive for the virus will no longer have to isolate themselves by law. This also means that people who do opt to self-isolate in the event of an infection will not be covered financially. The move, however, prompted health officials to urge the public to continue to wear masks and take precautions if infected. Over to Germany, Health Minister Karl Lauterbach confirmed that Nuvaxovid, the protein-based vaccine, would arrive this week. To that end, the vaccine manufacturer Novavax confirmed that it would deliver nearly 1.4 million doses this week. This vaccine is expected to convince that percentage of the population that is skeptical of the mRNA technology. Unlike the mRNA technology or the viral vector, this protein-based vaccine consists of a non-infectious component of SARS-CoV-2 virus that induces the body's immune response. On the business front, Facebook launched Reels, a short video feature owned by Meta Platforms. Reels is an addition to the organization's growing content format and targets the younger population that has taken to TikTok. News has it that this feature is not new to the United States and in some other countries. However, the latest launch is expected to give more coverage by expanding its availability to 150 countries across the globe. Reels will predominantly be featured on Facebook and Instagram. Commenting on the launch, Mark Zuckerberg stated on Tuesday that Reels is already our fastest growing content format by far, and today we're making it available to everyone on Facebook globally. Moving on, the leader of Hong Kong announced on Tuesday that the entire population would be mass tested for COVID-19 in March. The move was prompted by the sudden surge in infections led by the Omicron variant. The latest outbreak has crippled the country as hospitals are overwhelmed with patients, even as health officials predict new single-day infections to peak at 180,000 next month. Latest statistics show that the country has recorded nearly 54,000 cases and 145 deaths since the start of this year. Commenting on the mass testing drive, Carrie Lam remarked, "Since we have a population of some 7 million people, testing will take about 7 days." That brings us to this week's Did You Know? Did you know that Alfred Hitchcock, the name synonymous with horror, thriller, fear, and genres of the like, was scared of eggs? It's highly unlikely to fathom a man of his kind bearing a fear for anything under the sun, right? Well, apparently he was ovophobic. An individual with ovophobia has an irrational fear for eggs. The causes of ovophobia could range anywhere from genetics to past experience to upbringing. Whatever may have triggered this phobia in the master of suspense, we don't know. But here's his take on eggs as stated in an interview from 1963. I'm frightened of eggs. Worse than frightened. They revolt me. That white round thing without any holes, and when you break it, inside there's that yellow thing, round, without any holes. Blood is jolly red, but egg yolk is yellow, revolting. I've never tasted it. Guess this is one of the lesser known facts about the famous director of suspense. On that note, I bring you to the end of this week's World Report. I'll see you again next Friday with more world news on Spring Nectar TV. Stay safe.